Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar, A Marketer's Guide to Data Activation, How to Deliver on the Promise of Digital Analytics. My name is Michelle Versteeg. I'm Director of Marketing with Cardinal Path and will serve as your moderator today. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please submit them through the questions panel on your screen and we'll address them later in the presentation. You can also join the conversation on Twitter using hashtag #DataActivation. And this hashtag will also be available at the bottom of each slide in today's presentation. We are recording this, and everyone who registered will get an email with a link to the on-demand webinar within the next day or so. A bit about Cardinal Path. We're a digital data analytics firm that helps organizations unlock the value in their data and move the business forward based on those insights. Cardinal Path was recently named Most Influential Agency by the Digital Analytics Association, and our teams comprise some of the top minds in the digital marketing and analytics space. Our aim is to share all that we know. The inspiration for this webinar on data activation comes from the discussions our teams are having every day with some of the world's leading organizations. Now I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. Alex Langshire is co-founder and senior partner with Cardinal Path. Alex works with some of the most recognized global brands, and his industry leadership has helped to build Cardinal Path into one of the largest digital performance measurement firms in North America. Hello, Alex.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for that.
And Andrew Edwards is a well-known analytics industry thought leader. He co-founded the Digital Analytics Association. He authors books and articles on digital marketing and analytics practices and is Director of Digital Intelligence with Cardinal Path. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Good, thanks. We have Joe Nunziante. He heads up the Cardinal Path Client Services team, and he works with organizations to ensure that every marketing dollar is held accountable to measurable performance indicators. He's got an extensive background in media planning, and Joe brings a unique perspective to our discussion today. Hello, Joe.
Hey, Michelle. Looking
Hi.
today.
Great. Welcome to all of you. With that, Andrew, I'm going to hand it over to you to kick off the conversation.
Great, and thanks so much, Michelle, and thanks to everybody who's joined our webinar today. One of the things we're going to do here at the beginning is conduct a little bit of a poll with you guys. And we call it the Cardinal Path Data Activation Poll, and you'll see some questions on the screen here. We thought it would be real interesting for you to tell us what you think about this. So as you can see, we're asking you what most prevents you from getting value out of your data. So if you would select one of the following, that would be really great. So, I have no integration, I don't know what we really have, we have no plan, stuff takes too long, we don't have enough expertise, those kinds of things. And we're going to conduct this poll for, I guess, another few seconds, and I'm told that we will be should be seeing some results coming back pretty quick. So we're just going to hang in there and wait till we get some of those responses back.
And Andrew, the purpose of that, of course, is just to get a sense of where our audience is today, so we can be present to where you are, be in service of your needs.
Absolutely. So I'm seeing some results back here, and it seems like the winner, if you could call it that, is no integration between systems at 48%, which certainly is one of those topics we want to address today. Only 10% said we don't know what we really have. 16% have no adequate plan for success. A small number at 4% say stuff takes too long, and I guess the second largest constituent are those who say there's just not enough expertise in-house to get these things done. And so I think that sets up pretty nicely for our discussion today, because we're going to be addressing pretty much all of these things in a little bit more depth. So one of the things I'd like to do is talk about, we title of our webinar today is about data activation, so we really want to, define what we actually mean by that. What is data activation? Clearly, data becomes valuable when it becomes useful. So data is a 21st century asset of the organization, what are we going to do with it once we have it? We're going to try and pay attention to it such that it will help drive our decision making. And there's a couple of important points there, is that when you sign up for data activation, you're also signing up for being open to the changes in perspective that you may get from new data and being able to react to it. And I think that's probably one of the overarching themes for me.
Yeah,
as well as, go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to say that, this is a question of kind of nomenclature, so I want to really start off with just defining what is data activation. I think it's the new buzzword. It's yesterday's big data, it's the day before that, it's predictive, it's the day, we can go on and on as to what they were in the past. I think we're going to see a lot more talk about activation. And for us, we just wanted to put a stake in the ground and say it's pretty straightforward, right? It's not really complicated. It is that I'm able to use the information that I have to create value for the organization. And I do that by taking specific actions. And if we want to kind of focus that a little bit further, where would those specific actions be taken through activated data? It would be first on media, secondly on messaging, and thirdly on audiences. And I know, Joe, you have a particular perspective on this, but my sense is that when it comes to activating data for media, it is being able to really optimize that media spend, define where the goalposts are, tell the agency this is what we'd like you to optimize against, because it's kind of smart use of information. Messaging is really understanding those messages that resonate with the specific people across specific channels. And finally, it's this idea of audiences, right? That I've got enough information about the audiences that I'm able to create robust, meaningful segments and cohorts against which I can market to.
Absolutely, Alex. I think that I'm on the front lines with the team at Cardinal Path day in and day out, chatting with clients, and no one has the resources available to pursue analysis just simply as an academic exercise, right? So going into our work, we really need to make it very clear, and our clients really need to understand, based on the outputs, how is this going to impact our bottom line? And that manifests in these three areas, right? So media, I think, is fairly straightforward, helping with media mix allocations, maybe optimizing out of underperformers and doubling down on the best. Messaging and audiences being the other two key areas. So all the work that we do, we try to kind of frame it up across these three pillars in terms of what the impacts will be across your marketing plans.
And I think we do that, Joe, because it's our experience that the requirement to demonstrate return, the need to have some type of visible, tangible outcome, these are generally going to be not only your quickest, but kind of your good companions along the way, right? So the quickest ways that you can demonstrate that, and they're going to be good companions along the way because they're the kind of touchstone that you focus on with your activation efforts.
I think that said, our next slide is going to suggest that as well as we can understand where we want to get to, the actual activation is pretty difficult. And I know that I've seen across the board, and I'm sure lots of the folks who are listening today will identify with this, is that the thing that seems to generate the most anxiety for marketers and CMOs especially is that there's so much stuff and so many choices that it's difficult to begin a plan.
Yeah, this is some really good work that was done by IBM surveying CMOs about what keeps them awake at night. And they had a laundry list of items here. I mean, we see it when we speak to our clients. I'm sure that people on the webinar kind of relate to this as well. In fact, the first poll was question of the poll was getting to this point. And it is, as a poet by heart, the rhyme of the ancient mariner, it says, water, water everywhere, but nary a drop to drink, right? So we've got all this stuff. I'm just not sure how to get my hands around it. So we're seeing this in third-party survey information.
And what it does is it leads to kind of a disenfranchisement of data, which is unfortunate because of the resources being thrown at data collection and analysis and implementation. And yet, as you can see by this chart, we're looking at what looks like a decrease in the amount of times that folks are actually using marketing analytics, and people are falling back onto their gut decision making. And it suggests that, what Alex is saying is certainly true, that, if you were to have the same chart that would just say how much data is being collected, it would be skyrocketing. But the usage of it is almost headed in the other direction. At best, it's flat. And this clearly suggests that we have some operational difficulties.
Yeah, I think this is so. First of all, for those on the line, this is a CMO survey. They've been doing this survey. I think it's over 2,300 CMOs across North America and Europe since 2012, and they do it every 6 months. So the February 2012, 2016 survey is going to be done right now, I imagine. And this particular graph really is striking to me because it says that despite we know, all of us know, there's been more tools with more capabilities being sold to more organizations, and yet the trend line, as you say, Andrew, is either decreasing or flat. Now, it's important to note that this is an average across many sectors, and as you can see, the B2C product has a higher level of data usage, and I think this really reflects that most of those are digitally native organizations. But we throw this information up here to kind of create a level setting for everybody on the webinar that, this is actually a bit of hard stuff, and so we're still not seeing a change in the direction here. We're really seeing people still saying, look, I've got my favorite tool, and I'm just going to use that, interpret that, and I'm going to work from that.
Yeah, I mean, it's about adoption. I mean, it's, anybody who's been involved in this knows that, getting your constituents involved and getting them to actually look at stuff and analyze it and then make decisions off it, it's much easier said than done. And I know that's also been said before, but in this case, it's especially difficult because of the array of parties that have to get involved in order to make this stuff really actionable. And I think one of the other things that really kind of accents the difficulty here is the complexity that is in the marketplace today. We're looking here at our chart about what the analytics stack looks like in 2016, and as you can see, there's a lot of brand names in there, and they're all good products. They all do wonderful things in their own silo. Some of them are better than others. Some of them play well with others, and some don't. I think, but the problem is, without orientation, without someone to be able to say, look, these are the processes and functions and goals that you need. It's a little too easy for folks to fall prey to, like, I'm going to, the loudest voice is the last vendor I listen to, and so I'm going to focus on their technology or a related technology, and kind of losing track of the bigger picture.
Yeah, here this is by no means is this the full thing, but it's just kind of our take on the stack that's out there, and the problem set is that people look at this very much in this layered approach, right? So I'm buying a specific tool to answer a specific problem. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. But if you're not thinking about the larger issue of data flow and data interoperability, then the ability to activate across these different layers becomes really complicated.
Yeah, I think that's a really important theme, Alex, in that we're definitely going to be talking more about interoperability. And I think if you look across this stack here, some of these tools talk to other tools better than other tools talk to other tools. And one of the themes that I see jumping out at me over and over, and Alex, I'm sure you've seen this as well, is that when you're looking at a vendor's offering, does that tool have enough inputs and outputs? APIs, etc., so that it can, so that its data can be exposed and utilized throughout the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, and I'm not sure, Joe, if you want to add something here, but my last comment on this, the term data flow is important because data flows up and down, right? So if you're collecting and bringing it up into the BI layer, right, you're building your data warehouse and you're bringing in third-party tools and sets such as Experian or whatever, you want to then be able to then use that to then do your buying down at the advertising layer, right? And that's where programmatic becomes super important. So,
yeah. Yeah, Alex, I think kind of focusing in on that ad layer for just a moment here, I think this idea of simplicity is something I'm hearing more and more from our clients. This ecosystem is becoming just so overwhelming, and clients are feeling, almost forced to pay for additional levels of verification and validation and viewability tools just to know if they're getting what they paid for. I'm almost feeling this sort of shift starting to form where folks are leaning more towards, I want something, simple, a more simple approach. And so I think there is this sort of latent, built-up demand for, a more simpler approach, or at least an approach that makes sense. And I know we've got some thoughts of how to kind of take this overwhelming ecosystem and really apply it in a way that helps to deliver value across again.
You know what else I think is real interesting there, Joe, is that, we talk about simple, we're talking about what kind of insights and analysis reaches the decision maker, and there's an interesting little technology paradigm insofar as the easier it seems to the end user, chances are the harder it was to get it that way. And so that's another thing that we want to address, is that you want to keep us focused on what we need in the end, but in order to get there, there's a lot of small and sometimes complicated steps to get there. So if we look at some of the common challenges to data activation, we've kind of talked about how this, the quantity overwhelms the ability to do anything with it. Was kind of just before alluding to the fact that data collection and accuracy are actually huge stumbling blocks. I can't tell you how many times I've been inside of a pretty large organization only to have folks say, yeah, we've spent quite an amount of time on getting the analytics, but people don't, quote unquote, don't trust the numbers, which suggests that one of two things. One is that it might be that the data is contradicting their assumptions, which could be a good thing. It also might mean that they have conflicting numbers coming from different systems, and this in turn undermines their ability to believe in any particular set of numbers, and that's a real stumbling block. We also have a number of diverse digital ecosystems and actors. All these different agencies
Andrew,
playing different roles. Go ahead.
I just want to jump in here. Yeah, I want to jump in here and say this, that to me, there's, we can come up with a list as long as our arms with respect to what some of the challenges are. If you ask me to kind of focus on one that I feel is particularly problematic, it's this one. It's the diversity in the ecosystem as well as the actors. And so, this is a very unsexy statement I'm going to make, but it is absolutely critical to being able to activate data, and that is, in large organizations where you have multiple agencies and multiple actors, just getting alignment on the schema for tagging, just getting alignment on taxonomies, and just getting everybody to use them once you have that alignment is a core condition to being able to do activation. And so you can have great tools and technology, but if these kind of human processes aren't addressed up front, you can't start.
Indeed, and I think it also suggests that sometimes there are so many players in the analytics space in a given project that the smart money might be on narrowing down those who actually do the measurement to folks who are neutral and actually know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing is, of course, driving accountability to your internal teams, which is probably could do a whole webinar on that all by itself.
Oh.
It's a kind of a governance challenge. One of the things that I thought we'd move on to here is, talking about some of the buzzwords that we hear a lot. And we talked about, that sort of the stack, which is its own sort of buzzword, and we're trying to demystify that a little bit. But there's some other ones here: programmatic, predictive, digital marketing platform. What are those low-hanging fruit things that people can do right away? I think if you look at the underlying text in here, you'll see that what all of these assume is that there are certain table stakes things that are already happening within the organization. Really good systems, interoperability, integration, and the ability to deploy.
Yeah, Joe, I'd really love to get your opinion on this, because I mean, we've just recently done some work on DMPs, and maybe you can just share some of your perspective on that particular line, because that, again, these are steps along the way towards activation, right? These are tools that enable you to activate data, every single one here. It's like, so programmatic's really about activating data, predictive the same thing, DMPs. But maybe you could just spend a second on DMP data, Joe.
Yeah, no, totally. I think it actually is a really good example of, from my perspective, it's kind of an example of how hardware development has really outpaced the software side of things, so to speak, right? So, what we're seeing right now is that DMP platforms getting a lot of press, a lot of notoriety, and I think with good reason, because the promise is there. There's a lot of potential value in leveraging a DMP effectively. But I think the challenge here is that we can't ignore the human elements of kind of analysis, interpretation, and ultimately activation to really unlock that value. So for me, this is just kind of one example of how, that almost overemphasis of tools and technology and platforms is something that we've got to kind of work through and make sure that we apply in a way that helps our media, helps our messaging, and helps us really identify audiences, which is where DMPs can really maximize value for us.
Absolutely, and I just want to come back to predictive, and then we'll move on, Andrew. But
sure.
We our data science team, the head of that I often call Dr. No, and I call him that because we get people that say, "Hey, I'd love to do predictive," and we're like, "Great, let's do predictive." But that assumes that there's some base information and access to data that we have, and very few companies are able to do that. Although it is absolutely something that is powerful. I mean, we're talking about ninja level of expertise here, and also really good data systems underneath it. Dr. No, why? Because at the end of the day, it's like I can't do this. We can't do this because I don't have faith and confidence that the underlying systems are going to deliver me the data that I'll need to be able to do, robust analysis that will lead to some really good predictive models. So again, it is a challenge.
Yeah, I mean it's about whether you can enrich the basic data set, because if you can't pull data from different sources to add dimension to your audiences, for instance, you're not going to be able to predict very much.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about the time frames associated with this, where we're looking at the current tenure for a CMO at about 48 months, which is, that's not so terribly short. But the issue there is that a lot of these large data architecture projects take about as long as that. And so therefore, one of the things that we're seeing is, and Joe, I'm sure you have a comment about this, is that what the market is kind of crying out for is not more large, complex projects, but simpler, more easily deployed results.
Yep. I think that's completely true. I'm hearing a lot of advertisers, clamoring for it. And actually, we've got a good example just coming up in a little bit here of how we've actually been able to take something that, takes a few complex data sets and really makes the message as clear as day, so that we kind of have a playbook of sorts to act against. So we'll get to that in just a moment or two.
Here's my comment about this, all right, is that, so fantastic. The average tenure of a CMO has gone from 36 months of about 4 or 5 years ago up to 48 months, which is great. I mean, it gives you the opportunity to kind of get ahead of things. But if we're hearing the word activation and data activation, right? So the premise of this webinar is that this is a term that marketers are being asked to steer into and to have an answer for. And the standard type of approach that we see is that, well, this is actually a data warehouse or a data architecture or some other larger scale project. And those are good. We're not knocking that at all. In fact, we do those. That's not the issue. The point is that those have a timeline which is measured generally in increments of 12 months or a year or more. So it means that if you're going to embark on that, which is a good thing to do, right, it still means that you've got to have some other step along the way where you can start to demonstrate that taking this path of action is going to deliver value for you. And again, coming back to the idea of media, messaging, audiences, what is the reducible data set that I would need to have that I can activate so that I can make changes on those in some near-term time frame?
Absolutely, Alex. And let's we've identified a lot of different issues and roadblocks, and now it's time for us to start talking about our view on how you actually get past some of those and into actually activating the data to add value to your efforts, to your marketing efforts. So I rapidly want to move into, Alex, I'm sure you want to address this slide about the Four Noble Truths.
Yeah, I'm happy. So as somebody who meditates, very regularly, I'm enamored by the idea of noble truths, and we think about data activation and kind of popped up that there's these Four Noble Truths of this, because these are the things that we see on a regular basis when steering into these types of projects. And so the first one really is the data has to have a champion and a strategy. Data must be exposed and available. Second, data must be described and interoperable. And finally, owned and governed. And maybe we could advance to the next one so I could explain a little bit what we mean by each one of these.
Absolutely.
So I got a simple question, right? And that is, who is the data champion in your organization? If you are serious about wanting to activate data, who is the data champion? And I don't mean the CIO. That you've gone too far, right? Whose job is it, or whose responsibility is it? Who owns the function to be thinking about the data that's being collected across the systems that the marketers are using and the business is using? Who owns that function? So if you can't identify that data champion, then it's going to become difficult to start to activate that, because different people own different slices of the data. The next one is this idea of a data strategy. Right? So if you have a champion, the first thing we're going to need to do is a strategy. And the strategy is basically, how do I start to get these things to be interoperable, to work together, right? Now, great that you have a strategy. The question is it widely known and understood? I mean, I can point to specific examples where one branch of the organization is launching a data strategy and the other branch has no idea that one is being launched. And so, good that you've got it, but everybody's got to be aware of it, because if not, purchases for products or tools are going to be made that might not fit within that strategy. And so we're not really talking about making things slow. We're just saying that the strategy has to be out there. It has to be widely known and understood. So these are kind of preconditions, the first of the noble truths. The second notable truth is that data has to be exposed and available. And so what do I mean by that? Exposed is I actually know what I have. And it's a remarkable process to undertake a data audit in an organization and uncover all the sources of data and where they lie, right? Where they lie. So if you haven't undertaken that process, I mean, the activation is going to be siloed to a few key tools, right? You might be thinking, oh, okay, we're activating my cookie data. Well, that's fine, but really where it becomes more valuable is when you bring other things into it. the other thing is availability of that data. So I now know what I have. I now know, where it is, and I know that I can get access to it. So different elements from the organization may have different criteria about what can be shared and can't be shared. These things have to be understood. And the diagram that you see here is an actual architecture project that we did for a client. And why I put it up here, really to be able to demonstrate that these things can become complex when you look at them just quickly, but as you start to unpack each one, you'll see that there's a very logical association between these, and that the data is flowing, i.e. it's going back and forth amongst different things, and that is how activation occurs. Anything to add, Joe or Andrew?
No, I think that's overwhelming. It's definitely pretty overwhelming to look at.
Yeah. Described and interoperable. So going from the complex picture to kind of a simple one. So I just showed you data architecture. That's just identifying. And described data really means I know not only what data sources I have, but what's in those data sources. And that my understanding of what's in that data source aligns with your understanding, right? So if we're talking about specific fields, we have clarity amongst ourselves as to what those specific fields mean, particularly if you're looking at having the ability to have a common key between those. So having described data, again, really unsexy topic, super important. And interoperability is simply this. In 2016, to purchase a tool that doesn't have an API, an easy-to-use API, and a robust API so that you can pull that data in and out, just don't do it. Just say no, right? So interoperability is kind of a linchpin factor to being able to activate data.
I agree, Alex, and I would, certainly emphasize the interoperability factor because data that only activates within one one tool that you pick is going to have diminishing value over time as that tool's perhaps doesn't get updated as often, as it gets segregated out from the rest of the data that's moving on in the organization. So yeah, I can only agree 100% with you on making sure that you can take data, port data in and port it out and bring it to places where it can have the most impact.
The final noble truth is about owned and governed. If you are using a tool or you are working with an agency and information is being collected on your behalf towards your needs, you need to make sure that you have ownership of that data. That is absolutely 21st century corporate asset. It's surprising how many times this is not the case. So you absolutely want to make sure that your data is always owned, and yet you have the capability of taking from any different tool and bringing it into something of your own so that you have ownership of it. And that leads to the last one, which is governed. So I debated largely about the word governable or governed, and I landed on governed. And the reason I say governed is that it is somebody's job, and there is somebody who understands what you have and where it lies, and has control systems in place to ensure that before we hook something up, before we add something in, before we remove something, I understand what the impact is going to be on my overall ecosystem of data sources. So, again, governed is not a particularly, riveting subject, but it is, again, one of these foundational requirements in an organization that is leveraging data towards business competitive advantage.
Alex, I think back to some of our content a little bit earlier here, talking about timing and timelines, and thinking about owned and governed is as one of the noble truths here. For me, this really comes through and pays off in terms of time saving. Being able to know where and how your data exists, and then being able to own it as well as govern it, I think really helps shorten the distance from data as just an asset to data and analysis as value, as something you can actually activate against, right? So, for me, I think this really starts to kind of pay dividends when you start to shorten the distance between, on one side you've got the data, and on the other, how do you actually start to apply it? Well, if you're in control of it, you can really accelerate that process overall.
Well, also on the notion of owning the data, no matter who has collected it and who's deploying it, I keep coming back to a recent example where it's a pretty big client, household name kind of thing, and there are all these campaigns being run by an agency on their behalf, and the fact is the client really had no visibility into the success or failure of any of these campaigns except for a dashboard that was shown to them, and they had no ability to pull it, compare it, run it in any other system. It was all blocked off from them, and my advice to them was, make sure that these guys can actually provide you with the data, not just the dashboard that they came up with.
Violent agreement. Let's move to Joe's case study here, which I think is really kind of tangibilizes this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we wanted to bring this to life for everyone today, and so I think we've got a great example here of activating data to really drive value across some of those pillars that Alex mentioned, right? So just to hammer it home, again, media, messaging, audiences. When you talk to a marketer, if you are a marketer, I hope this rings true. This is where data actually starts to deliver value across your marketing campaign. So, and if some of you joined us last October for our purchase intent webinar, some of this content might appear familiar. I wanted to bring it forward as it really kind of brings to life some of what we've been talking about today as well. So just to kind of set the table, one of our clients, heavy ad spender, over $50 million in digital advertising spend per year across display, search, email, affiliate activities. They were facing a common but very significant challenge that I think a lot of us kind of face. If all of my sales, or the majority of my sales, are happening in my retail stores, foot traffic is really key for me. Well, how can I go about quantifying the value of website actions? Whether that's a store locator, an appointment, a click-to-call, email sign-up. How do I actually start to tie digital activity to offline sales? Simple question, complex approach to try and get to the answer. A lot of complex approaches exist. We try to kind of simplify the approach here, right? So, for this project, kind of going in and going back to those 4 noble truths, we check the box on, having a champion internally at the client, check. We've done a lot of the legwork to, make sure that the data was exposed from about a half dozen different agency partners and platforms, defined it, described it, and it was in control by the client, so it was owned. But we still had to make that leap, right? So it's one thing to have data exposed and available, it's another to actually get value from it. So we had to, cross that chasm of taking that organized data and interpreting it in a way that was really going to deliver value for our clients. So what did we find? The findings definitely surprised some of our clients. They had, understandably, some long-held beliefs that actions, website actions like store locators and appointments, were the best indicators of future in-store sales. And this is the direction being given to some of their agencies of what to optimize search campaigns and display campaigns against. In actuality, we found a few surprises. But if you think about the consumer experience, it all came down to time and to money, so maybe that's not so surprising after all. So what we're looking at here on the slide is a few things. Number one, if there's an immediate need, if time is not on your side, if you've got a flat tire or your AC broke on the side of the road, you need to find the quickest way to get from point A to point B right then and there. Click to call, store locator, make intuitive sense. Make a phone call, find the nearest store, and get the problem solved when you don't have the luxury of time. Now, if you do have some time on your side, maybe the tread in your tires is starting to wear down, maybe your brakes are starting to squeal, it's an issue, you've got to solve it, but you've got a few weeks potentially, that's where we saw website actions like email sign up, coupons really start to pop. And that makes sense because people are comparing prices, they're shopping around because they've got the luxury of time on their side. So time on one side, money on the other. If this was a big ticket item like buying a set of new tires or servicing your air conditioner, that's an expensive kind of outlay. So what we found to be the most predictive website action was credit card applications, right? So this kind of took the clients back a little bit because it was a bit of a surprise, but it was really powerful information because now we were making that leap from data to activation. Really important to acknowledge that this is still all potential energy. To kind of get us into kinetic energy, to actually activate it, we had to kind of jump over to the next slide here, Andrew, and take a look at, well, how does this apply? If you think of media, messaging, and audiences, we wanted to share an example here, a really clear-cut example of the impacts from media. So whereas they had been having their agencies optimize against store locators, maybe appointments some other weeks, maybe a hybrid of all of those actions combined, we were able to articulate very clearly where the goalposts should actually be. You know what? If it's product X, optimize against store locators. If it's product Y, appointments actually were the most predictive of future sales. And you know what? We were able to identify not just which actions, but actually how much those actions were worth in terms of revenue. So we could start to set some allowable CPA thresholds. And I mean, their agencies were eager to absorb this information because it made their remit much more clear, much more straightforward. So again, sharing this kind of just as an example of how we're able to bring some of the data to life, to activate it against some of those pillars. Yes, this has applications for audience targeting and messaging as well, but really the media application and kind of clarifying some of the goalposts of what to optimize against and what those allowable CPAs needed to be set at was really quite impactful for changing around their entire media optimization approaches.
And my experience, Joe, is that agencies, they just want to do a good job, right? They really want to do a good job, and help me define where these goalposts are is part of helping them do their job as best they can. If they're being told to optimize against something which is maybe not the ideal thing, in my experience, they're all about being as effective as they possibly can. So this is a kind of a classic example of the kind of the cooperative benefit that can accrue to the agency and to the client. If you're doing the analytics and focusing purely on the data analysis side, because it really delivers value to two partners.
And you know what, just to add to that, Alex, kind of going into this effort, we had an expectation of how this would manifest and actually be applied, and how we would activate it against things like media. Along the way, it became even more crystal clear just how much direction we'd be able to provide. So, client was excited. They had a good sense going in of how we were going to activate this. It wasn't just an academic exercise. It had real world applicability here, and yeah, it has really kind of changed over how they optimize some of their digital campaigns.
Cool, thanks, Joe. So we're sort of getting a little bit down towards the end of our webinar here, and wanted to begin wrapping up a little bit here. I know we talked about the issues we face. We talked about the noble truths. We talked about had a great example from Joe on how data activation actually looks like in the real world. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the what I would call the prioritization of data activation, or another way to put it would be the 4 Ps. So I think the thing that I'd want to emphasize most here is take a look at the order they come in. So the first thing, and some of this I'm going to say is perhaps counterintuitive, but I found is to be kind of the case the more I see. So the first thing that is really important is the right people have to be in place. Analytics, especially marketing analytics, is a classic left brain, right brain combination. So it's difficult to find people who are left brain, right brain, but it does require people who can understand technology and who are also comfortable with communications. I can't emphasize that enough. If you don't have those kind of people, or people who are really on one side but not on the other, and they don't talk to one another, you cannot hope for a whole lot of success, because they're going to spend their time doing things that are not going to drive to put the ball forward. The second thing is that them and everyone else in the organization needs to know where you're driving at. What is the thing that you're actually trying to accomplish? Some of this is, understanding what are my key performance indicators. What are the audiences that I'm trying to understand and drive results to? It really helps to know and have agreement across the organization on what it is that the people are trying to accomplish. And then once you know who the people are and what they're trying to accomplish, the next thing that's really important is to get something in place where we can have a process, something that's repeatable, that will enable them to get their results. And the thing I want to emphasize finally, I know we're kind of running low on time a little bit here, is that notice that the last thing I have on here is the technology, the platform. Most people have it the other way, but I'm going to submit to you that the platform choice has actually got to come after everything else. So it's a long journey. We should be planning our goals based on business needs, not technology. Where are you today? Where do you want to go? You need to know your assets. A data audit might be helpful. Having an operational plan in place is going to be really helpful. I don't know if any of you guys want to comment on that, or I can certainly move us on to our next slide.
All I want to say is that, again, my strong recommendation to everybody is that if you're going to embark on such a project, maintain the focus on MMA, not mixed martial arts, really just media messaging and audiences, because that develops the organizing construct for any of the work that you might do in this area.
Definitely.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, unless we have anything else, I was going to turn it over to Michelle here and see if we have questions.
Thank you, Andrew. And we do have a bunch of questions, but I feel like, we've heard a ton of information here today. I'm conscious of the fact that we all have a workday to get back to, so if it's okay with our panel, what I'd like to do is follow up with those of you who ask questions directly by email instead, and maybe even summarize that Q&A, which might be a nice value add for you as well. So just to wrap up, if you're looking to get started on next steps towards data activation, have a look at the on-site strategy session. This is a 2-day session at your place of business, bringing together stakeholders from across the enterprise, and some of Cardinal Path's most senior leaders will design a plan that will get you on track to activating your data and truly delivering on the promise of digital analytics. So you can download this solution sheet now with the link on the screen, and we'll also send it to you along with the webinar recording by tomorrow. If you have any additional questions, please get in touch with us, info@cardinalpath.com. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers. Alex, Andrew, and Joe, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us all today.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
And thank you for joining us. I hope you have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.